he saw the first man behind that rock over there, just saw his eyes. And then he ducked down again. And then, when he was going back, he saw another one up there, and again just saw his eyes, you know? So he saw two people. And he said at this stage he didn't know who they were.
Unsure of quite who he'd seen, Abbas says he did not contact the Iraqi authorities. Instead, he told his father and brother. They all returned to the wadi, this time armed with 2 Kalashnikovs and an antique bolt-action rifle. McNab and Ryan both described their first contact with the enemy as a bloody and dramatic firefight. McNab says they were attacked by armoured personnel carriers. They charged, their weapons blazing. They threw grenades and left the battlefield strewn with dozens of Iraqi soldiers, dead and wounded. Abbas and his brother Hayil have a very different version of events.
The patrol was passing under that ridge over there with the sort of nipple on top, okay? At that point, these 2 guys and their father fired 2 shots over their heads. Immediately, the patrol scattered, they went to ground, they started crawling into position, and they returned fire. And the bullets hit this ridge behind us here. Both the SS patrol and the Arabs were firing at each other. The SS fired a smoke grenade, and it created a big pall of smoke, and under the cover of the smoke, the SS patrol made off over that ridge right in front of us, okay? What McNab wrote was from this point here, they actually charged, but it wasn't 3 men that they charged, but this horde of enemies with armoured personnel carriers that were coming towards them across this ground, you know? And they did this kind of charge of the Light Brigade, firing their 203 grenades. You know, they destroyed one of the APCs, they threw a grenade into the back of another one, it exploded. And McNab gives the impression there were hundreds of bodies writhing all over the place. It was absolute carnage, you know? But this is a very, very different tale we're getting here, you know? Something much, much more simple, much more prosaic. 3 ordinary guys who lived in that house there that you can even see from here. Just local people, this is their back garden, you know? And there they were. That's, you know, if what they're saying is true, that was the only enemy they were up against. And this is pretty sobering, I have to say. Well, I just can't believe it. I'm reluctant to admit it at the moment, you know. I'd take a bit more convincing than this, you know. What I want to know is this, you know. I mean, we're told in their books that they dropped their Bergens at this point. Now, I want to know if these guys found the Bergens and where they were. And I'm going to ask them about that now. يعني أنت قلت لي يعني لقيتوا الحقائب بتاعهم مش كده؟ ممكن توريني بالضبط وين لقيتوهم؟ يعني they say that this is the point in which they found the first Bergens. So in fact the Bergens they found in 2 groups. One group of 3, one group of 5, which is on the other side of the hill. But this was where they found the first lot of Bergens. And they describe very, very well how they fought this tactical withdrawal, 1 man at a time, being covered by, you know, somebody else. And I can't see how they could have got that from anyone else. I mean, it was absolutely right, you know, but that's exactly how the SS would withdraw.
Michael is now in a quandary. Was there a pitched battle with dozens of dead, or was this just a minor skirmish? He needs to know what proof the Bedouin have got. Back at the house, the locals produce some of the stuff the SAS left behind.
Same with this one. This is a standard British Army jerry can, and this is a British Army shovel. This is not the original handle, of course, they put this on. And this is the lid of a claymore mine. And we know from the book that they actually did leave 2 live mines at the LUP. And these are not used by the Iraqi army at all, but they are standard issue for the SAS. Well, we've got hard evidence. Obviously, you know, they were here. There can't be any doubt whatsoever about that. And that these people, you know, had some contact with them.
Now convinced, Michael chews over some of the details with Abbas.
I know one tradition of the Bedou is that when somebody shoots in the sky over their heads, what they would do is wave their shamags, you know? And Abbas says that's true. That's what the usual response would be amongst the Bedou. And I think it's a great, great irony that if they'd had somebody amongst the SAS who'd spoken even a little bit of Arabic and had understood the Bedouin traditions, then this thing needn't have happened at all. You know, if they shouted out, "We're friends, you know, we're, you know, stop shooting," these guys would have probably just let them go.
Bravo 20 were very unlucky.
I spent many hours talking to Abbas, and eventually I discovered that he'd actually been a sergeant major in the Iraqi equivalent of the SAS. He'd served throughout the 8 years of the Iran-Iraq conflict in the front line, which was real hand-to-hand fighting. And amazingly, that meant that he had more combat experience than the entire strength of Bravo 20 put together.
Michael Asher is intrigued to know what Abbas thinks of the British soldiers.
And he says that they were really brave men, they really did their duty, you know. But he said whoever sent them here was lacking in brain power, because it was really ridiculous to send people to a place like this, where you couldn't survive, you know, that they knew nothing about. It was a job which was going to be doomed for them.
As far as Abbas was concerned, the SAS men were heroes sent on an impossible mission. As Michael Asher follows the route taken by the escaping men, there is another mystery to resolve. When an SAS patrol is deployed, there is an escape and evasion plan if things go wrong, which should be agreed by everyone beforehand. According to Ryan, the official plan for Bravo 20 was to go south, back to Saudi Arabia, an escape route used successfully by other SAS patrols. But Ryan also says that even before they left, the patrol had discussed going west. Unfortunately, they had failed to make this clear. As patrol leader, McNabb was ultimately responsible for this decision.
This was the most important decision Andy McNabb would ever have to face, and he decided to head for the Syrian border.
What made this decision so extraordinary was the fact that their radios had not worked since the patrol had been dropped by helicopter the night before. Back at base, no one knew of the change of plan. So while the patrol was going north and west, the helicopters were looking for them in the south. Bravo 20 were now well and truly on their own, and what was worse, the dangers of the desert had been underestimated. For although it was desert, it was winter. Already, by the second evening, the tough environment is taking its toll on Michael Asher, just as it did for Bravo 20, just over 10 years ago.
See, what occurs to me as I walk along is that this is much less a military story than a story of the power of the landscape. And I think Bravo 20 themselves, you know, as that night went on, must have realized that the desert itself was at least as much an enemy as the Iraqis who were chasing them. The SAS prides itself on its meticulous planning, but Bravo 20 set off into one of the coldest places on Earth without any proper cold weather clothing at all. And not surprisingly, they soon began to freeze, and as they did so, they got confused.
In the darkness, the patrol split up, and the two parts never found each other again. Michael prepares to spend the night alone, now following the route taken by McNabb and his 4 companions, Dinger, Coburn, Concilio, and Leggs Lane. They built some kind of wind shelter against the bitter wind. They had no sleeping bags, they had no tent. They were wearing SAS smocks, like this one, dated 1942. So they had nothing special to sort of keep the wind off. And there was a massive wind chill factor here. You know, it was probably -10, -20 degrees centigrade. And of course there were 5 of them. They cuddled together deliberately to share their body warmth. Bravo 20 went to Iraq in the winter, Michael in the spring, but it was still bitterly cold at night.
I really am beginning to feel quite cold, and you know, although it's absolute nothing like Bravo 20 must have felt, at least it does give me, you know, a slight indication of what it must have been like for them. I mean, they just stood no chance from the beginning, no chance whatsoever.
The early morning sun brings relief for Michael Asher. But back in the January-winter of 1991, Bravo 20 had no such luck.
It was freezing cold, and by now they were exhausted and soaked through. It was raining, snowing. They must have been in a pretty battered and dejected state.
The SAS tradition is always to avoid roads and tracks, but McNab ignored standard operating procedures. He and the 4 others hijacked a taxi and set off for the border. Abbas, the Bedouin who first spotted the patrol, has agreed to act as Michael Asher's guide, and they're now traveling together towards the Syrian border, in the very taxi hijacked by the SAS.
Abbas and I struck up quite a close friendship. I lived with the Bedouin. I really like the Bedouin. I understand their ways to some extent, and you know, we really stuck up a friend. Also, he's a very, very nice guy, a very genuine guy, and as he said to me, amongst the Bedouin, it's really considered a disgrace to lie. So this is the place where McNab and his patrol claimed to have killed 3 people. This was the end of the taxi ride for them. And, well, it was the last part of their journey, which ended in the capture of 3 of them and the death of 2.
Michael Asher and Abbas are on their way to meet another witness, a policeman who's told Abbas that he was at the vehicle checkpoint that very night. In McNab's book, he tells how the patrol shot dead 3 Iraqis at this checkpoint.
Well, this is great. Abbas is saying that this soldier, whose name is Ahmed, was here 10 years ago when the Bravo 20 patrol were here, and he knows everything about what happened that night, and he's prepared to tell me about it. McNab says that the car stopped in a queue of cars, and they could see a guard with a rifle over his shoulder coming towards them. And this is what he wrote. He did 1 tap on the window. I put my head right back and in the same motion pushed my legs out and pressed my body against the seat. The squattie's face was pressed expectantly against the window. Legs lifted the barrel. 1 round was all it took. There was an explosion of shattered glass and the car doors flew open. We were out and running before the body had even hit the ground. That's the way McNab described it. And he describes how once they were out of the car, they shot 2 other squatties, boom, boom, all right, and then ran off into the desert. Yeah, and I'm now going to translate that to Ahmed and see what his reaction is. Ahmed, يعني الرجل الألف في الكتاب كان واحد من ال5
Michael Asher's lengthy translation of Andy McNab's brutal prose prompts a curt response.
He said he's absolutely 100%, he said 1,000,000% certain that not 1 Iraqi policeman was hurt or killed, okay? Not 1. He's absolutely said not even a scratch.
Ahmed tells Michael that the British soldiers were spotted by this bridge. It was dusk. He went to fetch reinforcements. 25 armed police returned and went straight into a gun battle with the SAS men.
It was quite a severe firefight, a lot of bullets going off, and it lasted, he reckons, about 10 minutes. And they closed in on this location in a sort of pincer movement. When they arrived there, they found there was nobody there at all. They'd gone. They'd somehow slipped through the net.
There is one thing Ahmed and Andy McNab would agree on. This was the end of the line for the SAS men. In the darkness, there were more gunshots. Now, just a few miles from the Syrian border and safety, Bravo 20 were running for their lives. And on their heels were the police and some locals who joined them. The first to die was Bob Consiglio, here in this field.